we and us far more, which helps to create an environment where I've kind of neutralized the physical impact that I can make with behaviors that I exhibit to create a more balanced environment for everybody else to participate, which is something I have had to learn to do. And it was not something that came naturally or easy. It has been a long journey and I still don't get it right all the time.
Country Navigator, the Hippo question. A podcast all about cultural intelligence and inclusion. We're asking loads of people the important questions to find out what makes them tick and how culture has impacted their lives. We're going to look at their cultural hippo and find out what we can learn from the people who've made a career out of leveraging culture and inclusion.
Welcome to another episode of the Hippo question. And with me and Matthew today, is Tim Loake. Welcome, Tim. Lovely to have you here on the Hippo question. I think it's time for me to fess up a little bit, Tim. You're not actually just a guest, are you? Or a leadership speaker or a diversity and inclusion ally, but you are my mentor. And you've talked about how mentoring's helped you in the past. But before we even go there, right, let's just look at who you are, what do you do, and why you're on the Hippo question with us today. So over to you, Tim.
Okay, thanks, Nikki, and thanks, Matthew. I think by way of introduction, I am a vice president at Dell Technologies. I run the data center business for Dell in the UK. So that's all of our products that could or should go into a data center and the services and support around those. It's a reasonably substantial business. I've got a team of about 160 people operating across the UK, all customer verticals, all segments. What was the second part of the question?
No, I was just saying, what brought you here today? Why are you
here? Yeah. So I'm here today by way of a favor to you, Nikki. So thank you for the invitation, but also because diversity and inclusion is a massive subject for my business. Running a technical sales organization within technology, recruiting a diverse panel of people can be challenging. Most of our candidates tend to come from a single similar mold. And so I'm keen to build an organization that more appropriately represents the communities in which we operate. Dell has a guiding purpose around enabling people everywhere to thrive and through the technology solutions that we provide. And therefore, I think the team needs to be made up of people from everywhere and of all different types. So that's why I'm here. Hopefully we'll have an interesting chat and see where we get to.
Well, I'm going to jump in straight in there, Tim, if you don't mind. You've hit the prime topic straight away. Obviously, when I think of a company like Dell, I'm thinking of someone who looks like you, possibly a little bit shorter, because I understand you're really quite tall. Possibly wearing a suit, but I would say male, middle-aged, white man, and that I suspect is most people's stereotype of an IT company. And you mentioned that you want to make your recruitment more diverse. I'm going to go straight in with a simple question: why? Why do you think it's important to the business?
Oh, that's a really easy one. When I'm going to talk about the problem first, and then I'll talk about why it's good, right? So we all recruit people who look and feel like us, right? By nature, we surround ourselves with people with a similar background, a similar educational base, similar experiences, because it's the people that we have the most in common with, that we find the easiest to communicate with. So we would, if left unchecked, we would all build communities of clones, right, of ourselves. And that's how we would operate. The problem is, I only have a single lens on the world, right? I see the world through the eyes that I have, and I go about my life in my relatively affluent Surrey home and take my kids to school, and that's the world that I see. But that isn't the world everywhere, right? And if we don't bring people who have eyes and experiences and perceptions of the whole of the community in which we tend to operate as a business, you can't possibly expect to make good decisions about how you spend your time and money in order to run and grow your business. So we make better decisions when we have diverse thoughts and experiences in the room. That's a fact. There's no disputing that. And if I recruit a team that looks and feels exactly like me, I won't make good decisions.
Absolutely, I know. I think many people would agree with you. How does that work at a very practical level, though? I mean, obviously, we can't go out and say, "I'm going to recruit a woman to this post."
Well, you can, but it doesn't tend to go over very well, and you exclude half of your potential candidates if you do that. So for me, I am very particular about setting the conditions for recruitment specifically to be successful in this way. So what I mean by that is I will always hire the best person from the candidate pool that I am interviewing for a specific role. That's a given. There's no question about it. However, and here's the question: if I take applicants for a role, let's say I normally do an interview to hire ratio of roughly 10 to 1, right, when I'm hiring outside. If I have 100 applicants for that role, given the demographic of people who work in technology in the UK, I will have at least 90 white men, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty much what I'm going to get. If I then take 9 CVs of white men and 1 woman, the likelihood is when I interview those 10 people, I'll hire a man. It's just statistics, right? Because the best candidate will be. However, there's nothing stopping me taking the 5 best women who applied and the 5 best men and interviewing that as my panel, right? And building that balance into the recruitment process. So if you want to get in as a man, you better be the best, right? If you want to get in as a woman, you still got to be the best, right? But I might be taking the bar a little bit further down through my application pool in order to make sure I've got a balanced panel. Then I'll hire the best person, right? I also make sure that when we're building a decision team, we make sure that team is balanced, right? Back to my earlier point about hiring in our own image. If I build a decision-making team or board of people who look like me and behave like me and have a background like me, we'll probably hire someone like me. That's not helpful, right? So you've got to build diversity into the people making the decision as well as the pool of people from whom you're picking. And I think that's only fair. And that's practically how I do it.
Fantastic. No, thank you.
But Matthew, it brings me to a really fundamental question then, Tim, for you. I love what you said about fair recruitment practices, right? You pick the best person out of the pool of best people that you shortlisted. What do you think is going on in the world today? Why are we still seeing people sort of suggesting quotas for people that have been in the past ignored? Women and other sort of thing. Do you believe that that's the right thing to do then for organizations?
I'm not sure quotas are the right answer. We definitely have goals around how we want to transform the organization, and we're very clear about the percentage of the company that we want to be female at various different levels, and we have a moonshot goal around that. However, setting quotas, I don't necessarily think is the right answer, but quotas are, in most cases, government's way or large organizations' way of getting people to behave in a specific way, right? And by doing that, you force those who don't necessarily think progressively to at least tilt towards it. And it's about getting the pendulum swinging, right? So we have a world that has been tilted for hundreds of years towards a male professional base, right? That's what we have. Men go out to work, women tend the home. That's changing very rapidly, and it's not necessarily the societal view today, but that is what we're dealing with in terms of the workforce that we have today. So the pendulum is swung all the way over here. We have to do it whatever we can to start it moving back the other way. Some of that will come from people who get it and change their practices. Some of it will come from governments and quotas and organizations setting targets. I don't think that's necessarily the best way of doing it, but I think it is one of the tools we can use to start momentum to swing back towards the middle, right? So I'm not against it, but I think there are better ways, and I think educating people and helping them understand the why is a far more powerful tool than setting a KPI or a quota around it.
I think moving that needle, you call it a pendulum. It's about culture change. I think that's. I mean, how do you change that culture? How do you drive that? Whether it's in an organisation, whether it's in society. We talked briefly about your background in rugby. Rugby, again, traditionally is a very, very male-dominated environment. I think they've done quite well actually in promoting the women's teams. But how do you go about changing that perception or that culture?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to start, right? And that's slightly tongue in cheek, but it's also true that we've talked about this problem for a really long time, but no one was prepared to do anything about it. It was always, and I'll use gender as the primary example, right? Because it's the easiest one for people to understand. Gender diversity in the workplace was always a women's problem, right? It's the women's problem to deal with. But the women only make up, in tech companies, 15% of the workforce, right? How can 15% of the workforce change the culture or behavior of an organization? They can't, right? You've got to bring the majority to the conversation. So you have to start getting the 85%, the men, on board with the need for change. So from a Dell perspective, that's why we took on a program originally called Men Advocating Real Change. We now rebranded it to Many Advocating Real Change, which is effectively, it's supposed to be, we try not to call it training because it's not training, because training implies something that you learn to do. This is about awareness more than anything else. And it's about helping people understand why some of the cultural differences that exist around them. The concept of privilege, the concept of in and out groups, the concept of dominant and subordinate behavior, the concept of unconscious bias, and just help them understand that their perceptions are shaped by their experiences, and everybody else's perceptions are shaped by their own experiences and by the behaviors that they receive from others, right? And once you get people on that journey, then you can start moving the needle. But you've got to bring men to the conversation in the workplace. If you don't do that, you'll never move anything, because it's the women's network running fantastic charity events to promote women in the workplace and maybe attending a few seminars, and it's not going to move anything, right? You've got to bring the 85% to the conversation. So that's the first thing. On the rugby side, it's about consistency. It's about showing and living the values and living the behaviors, right? I mean, community rugby has really strong values. So we talk about teamwork, respect, enjoyment, discipline, and sportsmanship as the 5 core values that the RFU has set out. And if you go to any coach in any club in the community game at any age group, I would hope they would be able to name all 5 values and explain to you how they build those into the training programs that they put together with their kids or young adults or whatever it is, and indeed in the adult game as well. I think as we look towards the professional game, and it is now a profession, the influx of money and technology into the game has changed some of that. I don't think it's changed the core values necessarily, but it's certainly changed the exhibited behaviors, both of players and of match officials, and not necessarily for the positive, right? So we're on a journey with, for example, VAR to make the right decision all the time. And that's good, right? In terms of implementing the laws of the game, the way that the game should be played, and deciding whether the points are scored or not scored, it's a fantastic tool. The problem is it obfuscates to some extent the decision-making power of the referee. And by doing that, you actually diminish the perceived responsibility of the referee, and therefore the respect towards the referee from some of the players, because they just go, check it on the TV because I don't trust you. And that it breaks some of that implicit trust that is absolutely still there at the community game, where the referee's decision is final. You have no argument. There is no recourse. There is no VAR. You have to just roll with it because that's how the game is played. That changes as soon as you get to that top level. And I think as you bring that back into a corporate world, I'm going to go back to the MARC example. The way we rolled that program out was that Michael Dell took his direct reports through that program first. It was leader led. The ELT then took their teams through that process, leader led. And then as leaders through the organization, we cascaded all of that messaging, all of that knowledge through that program to our teams to try and lead by example. So this wasn't a training company coming in or, a bunch of external consultants. This was Dell people talking about Dell examples and Dell challenges and Dell opportunities to help our teams move forward in the way that they interact with each other and the world around us and our customer base ultimately. And I think that's really important. And we need to be careful in rugby that we don't create a separation between the game that's played at the very top, both national and premiership level, and the rest of the game. And some of the proposed law changes actually potentially make that even worse, right? They're going to have different rules in the community game versus the professional game. And I think that is a slippery slope because you will separate the two. So for me, that I'm concerned about for the future of rugby. But I think in a corporate world, leader-led, set the tone, lead by example. That's the best thing we can do.
But let's pick on that a little bit, right? I love the idea of leader-led, Tim. But if you look at the corporate leadership in most large global organizations, it's still white male dominantly, right? So how do you change that first? And second part of this question would be, is there fear? Because you could be making yourself, this white male in professional capacity, obsolete perhaps, or talking yourself out of a job by supporting MARC. So tell me where how does that sit with you? What's going on there?
So I'll do the fear question first, right? Because I get this one a lot. You just have to, if you want to be promoted, if you want a new job, if you want to do something, you've got to be the best, right? And that's not best from the half the population who've decided to ask the question. It's you've got to be the best of the best, right? And that's the best of everybody. So for me, and I don't know whether it's confident or arrogant, I've always worked on the basis that I'll be the best I can be, and that will either be good enough or it won't. But I'm quite happy to be tested against everybody and anybody as to whether I am the best for the role, the function, the project, whatever it might be. And if I'm not, and I'm found wanting, then somebody else should do the job, right? And that's fine. So I think the best thing is a relatively straightforward one. In terms of changing at the top, that is a long process because we can't take people with zero experience and who've had zero opportunity to run large parts of organizations or companies and just put them in at the top and go, hey, great, you fit the profile of what we were looking for to change the diversity thinking along on our executive board. Good luck. You actually also need to be able to do the job, right? And so we have to bring people through the organization. So it has to start at the grassroots, and we have to then progress people as quickly as we possibly can without breaking anybody and without breaking the company in the process to move them through the organization at pace and get them to the point where they are ready to take on larger chunks and larger jobs at the top of the company. And that means we need to be proactive in the support that we provide. And I'll use women again, but to our female population, we have to make sure they've got mentors, make sure they've got coaches and sponsors, make sure they get access to challenging projects and opportunities. Give them the best possible chance to be successful and to progress and move their way through the organization. That has to happen. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that the men get overlooked. It just means they have to now compete with a bunch of the population who weren't there before, right? You've still got to be the best. And for me, that means, yes, we will give our female population a helping hand because they need it, right? There's less of them. The table stakes are tilted against them, just statistically. So they will get a little push, and that's okay, right? That doesn't mean that we will discriminate against any men. It just means we're going to give the women a push, and we're going to help them be successful. And I think that's okay.
So, Tim, time for the inevitable question of this podcast. Tell us, what is your cultural hippo?
Oh, cultural hippo. I think for me, it's always been associated with my physical presence. I mean, you know this because you met me in real life, Nikki. Obviously, others and those on the podcast haven't. I'm a reasonably big guy. I'm 6'5". At one stage, I was a lot larger than I am today when I was playing rugby. So I've slimmed down a bit recently, but I still can be a relatively imposing presence when I walk into a room. That can be difficult for people to deal with, particularly if I come in with direct, booming language, and I can dominate a room in a way that will make those of a more introverted disposition unwilling to participate in a discussion. So I can use that to my advantage, but as I've moved on as a leader, I have found that has become more of a disadvantage than anything else. So I now have techniques that I deploy to actively reduce the impact that I make in a room, specifically when I'm physically there. It's less of an issue on Zoom because I think we're all equalized by the armpit to head video window. When I'm physically in a room, it can be a challenge. So I will artificially lower my voice. I will use more inclusive language. I very rarely will say I or me. I'll use we and us far more, which helps to create an environment where I've kind of neutralized the physical impact that I can make with behaviors that I exhibit to create a more balanced environment for everybody else to participate, which is something I have had to learn to do. And it was not something that came naturally or easy. It has been a long journey and I still don't get it right all the time, but I'm continue to work on it.
So what's good mentoring look like then? Because you're my mentor, and I'm curious to hear a
Well,
little bit. What do
So
you get
so
out
am
of
I.
Well, I don't know. You tell me. I think from my point of view, I think mentoring gives an opportunity to provide a perspective that you wouldn't otherwise get, right? The people that we deal with day to day, we will typically will have a vested interest in what we're doing because we're doing business together in some way. We're either working for the same company or we're working in different parts of the same organization or working on a project together. So the people you deal with always have a vested interest in the outcome, in the answers that they give you. So when you're looking for perspective on a problem or a challenge or whatever it might be, being able to ask somebody who has no axe to grind and a bunch of possibly relevant experience will give you a perspective. Now, it might be a perspective that you go, that is not the problem I'm asking about. I'm not going to listen to that today. But you have the choice. At least you've had the thought, right? And you've had the input from somebody outside, given the facts as presented. This is what I would do or where I would go or whatever it might be. So for me, I think mentoring is about perspective. I also think it's about experience, right? I mean, I have experience of large corporates for the most part, right? That's the bulk of my experience. I did spend a couple of years running my own business for a while, but it didn't last very long. So I would never profess to be an expert in how to run a small business. Not my thing. But if I'm talking to somebody who's running a small business, but who wants to be more like a grown-up business, right? Who wants to start bringing corporate values to their company, or who wants to think about how they get into the corporate space in terms of their client base and they're struggling, I can absolutely help with that because I understand the other side of the conversation. And I think, so mentoring is a combination of skills and experiences you don't have and perspective.
Just
Yeah,
on
I
that
agree.
then.
I mean, sorry, go
Go,
ahead,
Nikki.
Matthew.
Okay.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think where it's helped me the most, perhaps, is that very sense of perspective, the very sense of someone who has a bit more experience than I do in this journey, in a career progression, etc., who can bring in a new point of view, perhaps, or something they've tried and tested, and a safe space to kind of talk about it without
Mm-hmm.
there being any judgment, without there being sort of any coaching, because coaching's slightly different, isn't it, to mentoring someone. And I think that's what I've appreciated very much about that relationship of mentor and mentee. Sorry,
So
Matthew,
I
you were
mean,
going to add.
yeah, I was going to follow up on that and ask Tim whether you've had those people in your life who've been able to mentor you, or who perhaps helped you on your way. Have you had those people?
I have, and I had them more earlier on when I needed it, I think.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't need mentoring now and I have people I work with today, but I think we go through careers and personal development and progression tends to be, it's not linear, right? It kind of comes in steps and waves. And I think we need the most help when we're trying to overcome our next personal barrier, right? Our next breakthrough point. And I have been fortunate enough to have some of those people support me as I've gone through some of those journeys. So I one specific example, I moved from being a frontline leader to taking on my first kind of organization wide role, probably coming up for 10 years ago now. And our EMEA leader at the time, who was somebody who I had kind of grown close to, working on a couple of projects and what have you, and we had an informal mentoring relationship. He pulled me into his office. He said, right, you got the big job now. You need to work out who you can talk to. He said, it might be me, it might be somebody else, but go find yourself someone you can talk to, because all the people you used to talk to who were your peers now work for you. So you just single-handedly taken on a job that's significantly larger than you had before and destroyed your support network in the process. So priority number one, go build a new support network and find people you can lean on, because it's really important. And then he said, and second piece is, you're going to make mistakes. You're not going to get everything right the first time. And half your team are going to hate you because they wanted the job too. So people are gunning for you. Accept it and move on, because you can't do anything about that other than being who you are and doing the best you can in the job. So go get on with it. And they're pieces of advice that I have shared subsequently with others going through similar transitions, and actually have served me quite well. There's plenty of others, but that's just one that springs to mind.
I mean, the reason I ask is because one of the someone I was working with a couple of years ago said to me that the biggest problem with being a woman and a person of color who's succeeded is that I get 15 to 20 requests to be a mentor to them a day.
Yeah.
And when you have a person who is a person of color, or a woman, or someone who feels they're from an underrepresented group, they're looking to people like them to help to find out how they overcame the challenges, how they've survived, how they've succeeded.
Yeah.
And what we're doing is we end up putting this huge burden on these people who've managed to somehow get to the top, despite all the structural barriers in place. We say, here you are, now mentor these 300 people who want to get your job.
Yeah, the mentoring thing is a problem for me too, and I don't fit any of the reduced or minority demographics that we've been talking about today. I am literally the template of majority, mid 40s white male. But it is a problem, and so I am quite careful about the number of mentees that I take on, because otherwise it can become a huge drain on my time. So that becomes a problem for me, but also I end up giving nobody any value, which then becomes a problem for them as well. So in my experience, certainly within a corporate, mentoring relationships have a 6 to 12 month lifespan. After that time, you've kind of run out of useful things to say to people. And so you might continue to meet with them on even a regular basis or an ad hoc basis for coffee and biscuits, but the mentoring part kind of passes by, and just becomes a networking opportunity. And so as I roll people off, then I'll create slots for others to come on. But I think we also have to be, as mentors, we have to be honest with ourselves and with people who are coming to us for help and say, look, I'm busy right now. I don't have any space. However, given what you're looking for help with, why don't you talk to this other person, go work with them for 6 months and then come back, right? And let's have a conversation and see where I'm at. Help them progress in the meantime. I think that's the responsibility that we have. And that's certainly the way I approach it. And funnily enough, I had one of those conversations only a week ago, and the person was incredibly grateful. They had expected a no from me, but they did not expect but why don't you talk to this person who I think can really help you? And so that was a good outcome.
No, thank you, Tim. I think I've benefited. I know this, and I'm proof of the mentoring that you've offered, definitely. And I sincerely hope listeners out there, because you've shared some amazing advice today, some of the practices that you are encouraging within Dell, but also MARC, as a team, if you like, and supporting others with this. And that's what this podcast is all about, right? The Hippo Question is all about people like you who've been there, done that, to support people that are either on their journey of trying to be there and do that, but also for organizations who are really trying to fundamentally shift a culture and become more inclusive in their practices, develop greater cultural intelligence overall. So on behalf of all of us, Matthew and myself on the Hippo Question, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of the week.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Matthew.
The Hippo Question with Country Navigator, the #1 platform for cultural intelligence and inclusion training. Tune in for more interviews with global business leaders and find us at countrynavigator.com.